Hello, I'm Alex Bolboacă, coming to you from the Mosaic Work Studios with a new video in the series Raise the Bar, a series of video in which we challenge the existing practices of software development. In this video I will do something a bit different. I would like to answer this question: how do we learn when we have too much to learn but we don't have enough time? What can we do? And one of the answers to this question is deliberate practice. And because I did recently a talk on deliberate practice in which I showed a lot of examples and practices, I would like to add this talk to this video. So what you'll see in the next 45 minutes is my talk at the 8th edition of I.T.A.K.E. Unconference, which was a digital conference, and where I also did a few experiments. One of the experiments is that all the slides are videos. So you'll actually get a chance to see a much more interactive presentation with some video materials, some recordings of my sessions with deliberate practice in various types of activities. And I hope that this will give you a lot of ideas on what to do next, how to learn, what to practice, and how to practice, or at least a bit of inspiration. Thank you and enjoy the talk. Welcome back, everybody. It's time to look at a technique that helps us learn faster, especially helps us master skills faster. It's a technique that has been used by many people from different domains, and I have the opportunity about sharing my experience about it with you. So it's impossible to have a conversation about raising the bar and about challenging yourself without talking about deliberate practice. So let me quickly introduce this topic a little bit. It's about, as I said, it's a technique that has been used by many people from sports, from business, from especially in domains like tennis or baseball or even in science, and for 10 years or so has entered more into software development, but not as much as I would like. So today what I like to do is to share a bit of my experiences with deliberate practice and see if we can extract some patterns, some formats, and perhaps even give you some hints on how to start your own deliberate practice. By the way, because I like to live up to the challenge that I set to others, I set a challenge for myself to do the slides in a different way, so I have video slides for this talk. We'll see how this works. It's an experiment. I've done a lot of testing, but you never know. So let's see. I'm Alex Bolboacă. I've been building software products for the last 20 years and sharing and teaching for my experience for 13 years. I'm passionate about helping teams to write code that works, code that you understand, code that you can change, and code that is robust, and to build products that are useful. When I'm not writing code or writing books or teaching, I also play video games. The last one that surprised me is European Truck Simulator 2, which apparently also has an interesting following of and diverse following of people, a diverse community. So today, what I want to talk about, it's always good to start from a core question that you want to discuss whenever you do such a talk. Because the question allows you to focus the conversation and to figure out and to think about various answers and how you can solve a specific problem. And the question that I want to ask is, what do we do when we have too much to learn and not enough time? This is a very common complaint from anybody who wants to get better. There's always like, I have a huge pile of books that I need to read. I have a huge playlist of videos that I want to watch. But I don't have enough time to go through all that and to do everything that I wanted and to learn everything that I wanted. And so this is the core questions that I'm going to discuss. The first and most important thing that you need to recognize is that time is fixed. So whenever people tell me that I don't have enough time to do X, what I'd really like them to tell me is I have other priorities. It's perfectly fine to have other priorities. You don't have to put learning as, the only thing that you do. But it's important to think differently about your time. Your time is fixed. You choose what to do with it. And by the way, I don't mean this in a blame style. I don't mean this to say if you're not learning, if you're not reading things, then you are worse than other people. Not at all. What I mean to say is, and I will take my own example, I came to the conclusion long ago that different people waste time differently. I'm perfectly fine with that. I'm perfectly fine to waste my time in the ways I choose. And that's how it is. I play video games, I watch YouTube, I watch Netflix, I play board games. I do a lot of other things besides learning, but I know what my priorities are. And if my priorities in a week or in a day or in a month are to learn some things, that maybe I will drop some of these things for a while. If my priorities are to relax and waste time, that's perfectly fine. I don't see any blame in that. So be very honest with yourself. That always helps. So then if the time is fixed and we have chosen our priorities, there's still a question of how to learn new skills faster. And I will focus on skills. There are two types of learnings. There's one that involves learning, gathering more information. But today what I would like to focus on is mastering skills. Learning new skills faster, improving existing skills faster. So things like if you already know how to write code, okay, how can I write code better? What does better mean in this context? What can I do to deliver features faster? Perhaps this is an even better question. Or what can I do to deliver business value faster? Even better question, because then this sets you to a line of thinking where you try to figure out what's the business value that I deliver and where do I get stuck and what little things can I improve on the way to get better. And just to be clear on a certain point, this idea of deliberate practice that we'll see can help. It's not magic. It requires a lot of work. It's a specific type of work, but it requires not necessarily a long time slot in every single day or every single week. You can just do 30 minutes, for example, in order to get better. And the basic and fundamental thing behind this is if I improve my skill by 1% every day, then I'll get much, much better in a year or in 2 years or in 3 years. However, again, it's not magic. There are some skills that you can never get better. You plateau and you get there because this is our genetic makeup. I cannot sing, for example. I have difficulties drawing in a very artistic way. And yes, I could practice those things and I can improve to a certain level, but I will never be a professional artist that can draw artistic stuff. So that's the fundamental idea. I also have to figure out which are the things that you can improve and want to improve. So these are a few things that I improved in time. Touch typing, writing, public speaking, web design, graphical design. I used to be quite bad at graphical design. I improved in time. Marketing, refactoring, TDD, clean code, software design, and recently video conversations, because I have now also become a YouTuber. I have a lot of interesting conversations that we record with people with a lot of experience from our domain and who can share a lot of interesting things. But there's an art in doing this, and if you watch the first few videos that I recorded, they were not as good as the last ones. You improve, you try out things and improve. Online learning, it's another thing that we started for a few years, and I'm very interested in how to improve the materials that we build, the slides that we share, the way we build the online programs for learning. So it's interesting. And today you saw me in the other role as an MC, making sure that everybody understands what's going on in this remote event and that I introduce the speakers and so on. And before we go further, I would like to show you an example of deliberate practice. And this is actually the first example that I realized was very, very useful and helped me to grow a skill extremely fast. And I named this chapter Mavis and Me because it's about a little program called Mavis Beacon Teaches Typing, which I used when I was in, I think, the first year of university to learn touch typing. And I recently realized that I can actually download it, and I recorded a quick practice session with it, because the way Mavis helps you learn touch typing is very, very interesting. So let's see this session. This is the initial interface, but the interesting part is the goal. You choose your goal. This is something common for deliberate practice, and you can see there I chose the highest goal possible, and then you start taking a lesson. You start by testing your typing level. If you notice in the interface, you can see how you are supposed to type. Where should your hands be and how you should move them and so on. And the initial exercise gives me just a few common, simple words that test the different parts of the keywords. So you see said, fed, flag, ask. These are all words that are built so that you can it can see what parts of the keyboard you are using properly and which ones you aren't. And as you can see, I'm making a few mistakes, and it colors them immediately, but it's also, on the other hand, you'll see it's also very friendly. It doesn't scare you when you make these mistakes or at the end. And now we get to something more difficult, because you need to know the symbols. This is what I had the most troubles with even today. Exactly hitting the numbers and the symbols without looking at the keyboard. So now it gives me a result. It says I have a typing speed 56 words per minute, 11 errors, computes an adjusted speed, and so on. Not so interesting, but it already sees that you have a problem with number keys. So let's try them. And now again it shows me how to use the number keys properly. And by the way, again, you shouldn't do this while looking at the keyboard, and that's what I tried to do. You see me focused, I'm looking at the display, not at the numbers, not at the keyboard. So I'm touch typing, trying to do my best, but it's also a problem, you know, I don't always hit the right keys. Okay, this is a better session. I learned a bit more. I made only one error, but 80 something words per minute. That's really cool. So now again, it gives me an exercise that challenges me to not only hit the right letters, but also the right numbers and the right signs on the keyboard. Okay, done with that. 60 words per minute, a bit slower because I focused on trying to not make so many mistakes, and that's what it advises you. It advises you to focus on accuracy over speed first, and once you get the accuracy, then you can increase the speed. This is another very interesting part of deliberate practice. You should focus on one thing, set the constraints for it. Once again, quick session with number keys, and now we go back into typing some sentences. And as you can see, this may not look very interesting. I mean, if you watch it, it may even look boring, but when you're actually doing this, it's very, you are very focused, and you need to focus on the things that you are doing and make sure that you don't make errors and try to type as fast as possible. And this becomes quite an interesting challenge. And I guess my favorite part is this one, when we do a car race with typing. That car is moving at a specific speed, and let's see if I can overtake it. You can see that once again it gives me keys that I made mistake with, and you have bugs on your windshield if you are making mistakes, which is a really nice representation. Okay, 78 words per minute, a little bit better. So now I close this session because what I want to show you is a few reports that it gives me. And it's very interesting because part of deliberate practice is having some metrics. And this is the one that I find very interesting. You can see the keys, you can see the keys that are involved in most of the mistakes, but also the very important part, the types of mistakes that I make. So a type of mistake is a drop key, so I forget to type one character. Another type is, for example, a switch. So instead of typing on the left side, I type on the right side. And these are common errors that you can see. And Mavis adapts to your errors and tries to give you more challenging things, but on the specific type of errors that you are making. So this was the first time that I realized I was doing something that was really helpful to me. This is how I learned to type, to touch type, to have a proper position of my hands, to learn the position of all the keys on the keyboard and not look at the keyboard while I type. And this has helped me tremendously to write books and blog posts and articles and code, because when I type code, I don't look at the keyboard, I don't think about the keyboard, I only think about what I'm trying to accomplish. And while it doesn't seem much, if you can do this, it helps you. Another example of deliberate practice is related to a problem that I've had for a longer time, which was public speaking. So you see me speaking today, and I can speak for a whole day, and I can give talks in public, and I can do all these things. But something like 13 or 12 years ago, whenever I went to do public speaking, I couldn't actually start speaking for the first few minutes. And that's why I always, if you search YouTube for my early talks, if they are still there, I always did pair talking, and I always started a little bit later. And I got over this by getting out of my comfort zone and kept trying to improve and to remove this stage fright. But then I got to the point where, okay, I can now speak fairly well, but can I make my voice sound better? Can I control my voice better? Well, once I got over the stage fright, I know how to build a presentation, I know how to make slides, I know topics that I can talk about, but then can I make my voice sound better? And so I got a voice coach, and I have these sessions with him still ongoing. And it's been a very interesting journey because I learned a few things. So I learned things like I have 3 characteristics for a voice, and there's the height with the wish to speak, whether you speak very low or you speak very high, the volume, no explanation here, and various types of emphasis. And so it's been very interesting to see the kind of exercises that I went through. And once again, these exercises may sound like quite boring, but they are very interesting when you are doing them. They are not very interesting, perhaps, when you are watching them. But since we are talking about raising the bar and challenging yourself, this is basically what you need to do. So I have here a text, and I will first read it in a very flat style. The way I would read it normally, this by the way comes from the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, is I won't necessarily read all of it, I just want to make, to give you examples of the kind of exercises that I went through to try to improve the control of my voice, and bear in mind this is still an ongoing process. So first time I would read just flat, right? The house stood on a slight rise just on the edge of the village. It stood on its own and looked over a broad spread of west country farmland. Not a remarkable house by any means. It was about 30 years old, squattish, squarish, made of brick, and had 4 windows set in the front of a size and proportion which more or less exactly failed to please the eye. It sounds extremely boring, yet this is, let's say, the natural way in which I would tend to read this text. And so my coach came and said, so let's try to do a few things differently. Let's try to read one sentence with high volume, but basically very deep voice. Next sentence, low volume, but higher voice. So we get to, it won't make sense, but this is what you get through. The house stood on a slight rise just on the edge of the village. It stood on its own and looked over a broad spread of west country farmland. Not a remarkable house by any means, it was about 30 years old, squattish, squarish, made of brick, and had 4 windows set in the front of a size and proportion which more or less exactly failed to please the eye. And this is one exercise that helps me control my voice. And now we can add some emphasis. So what would we like to emphasize, and how can you emphasize? Where you can vary the volume in the middle of the sentence, so you can make a break in the middle of the sentence. So you can say something like, the house stood on a slight rise, just on the edge of the village. It stood on its own and looked over a broad spread of west country farmland. Not a remarkable house by any means. It was about 30 years old, Scottish, squarish, made of brick, and had 4 windows set in the front of a size and proportion which more or less exactly failed to please the eye. And once again, it's not perhaps the best way of rendering this text, but it allows me to practice how I do it. So what is interesting about all this? And why I wanted to show you these ideas. These 2 exercises, these 2 styles of learning have a common pattern. And let's discuss what this pattern is. First of all, we have a clear goal. In the case of typing, I wanted to touch type and do it faster. In the case of public speaking, I wanted to gather more attention from the people I was speaking to, and I'm still working on that. So you have a clear goal. You then decompose a skill into various parts, into smaller parts. If you noticed, when I started in Mavis, it first gave me things like fed, said, ed, so my left hand, and then it moves to your right hand and gives you other combinations. Then you have focus on a small part of the skill. We don't practice the whole skill, we just take a piece of it. Very important, fast feedback. If you are just practicing, but you don't think about what you're doing, and you don't think about where you are making mistakes and what you could do better, it's not deliberate practice. It won't help you as much. You need fast feedback. Some metrics. It's useful to have some metrics if you can measure things. And usually if you first start with deliberate practice, you won't know precisely what to do unless you have a coach, but you can understand the metrics in time. Very focused. Once again, if you are looking at a deliberate practice session, it may look like something boring. When you are doing it, you are very engaged. You need to be very focused, very attentive. And this is actually one of the challenges with deliberate practice, because people tend to lose their attention and their focus. And you go into mechanical mode, and that's the point where you don't learn anymore and you need to take a break. It has to be repeated and systematic. I just showed you a few sessions of practice, but this is something that I have to do daily or weekly, and in the same way for a number of weeks or months. And you have to feel that you're getting out of your comfort zone, because otherwise you're not actually improving your skills. So it's time to give a definition. Deliberate practice is a special type of practice that is purposeful and systematic. And it requires a lot of focused attention, and you have a goal to improve performance. This is basically what we've discussed until now in a nutshell. If you want to learn more, James Clear's book on deliberate practice and his excerpts from his book on his website give you a lot of information and a lot of history about the concept. So now let's move to the interesting part. We are programmers, and until now I haven't talked about programming, well, except for typing, but that's not really necessary programming. So how to practice programming skills? Well, the first problem is that we have a lot of programming skills: refactoring, click code, unit testing, keyboard shortcuts, comments, naming, starting a project, blending pages, automating installations, and so on. And there are a few ways to do that. One of them is to do alone. So when you're doing alone practice session, you can use things like, I will just mention them, coding kata, or a toy project, or your own custom type of practice. I have done coding katas in the past. I have personally enjoyed toy projects more than coding katas, so but that's up to you, and it's also up to what you want to learn. The next option is to do pair programming. Find somebody who wants to learn or who already knows the skill that you want to practice. Pair with them, get out of your comfort zone, try out new things. Again, fairly clear and simple. Perhaps the most complicated, although today you have a lot of opportunities, is a programming community. And here you have options like mob programming, a coding dojo, or a code retreat. I invite you to look for these terms if you don't know them, but basically they are various formats in which a community can get together, learn from each other, or a team can get together and learn from each other and challenge the way you do your skills. So now let's look at how we can design a practice session. All right. The first thing we need to do is to pick a skill. So if you need to have a specific goal in mind, if perhaps you want to learn refactoring, in that case, it's useful if you can split refactoring into smaller skills. If you cannot do that, that's fine. Just start your practice sessions. That's more important than anything else. Don't overanalyze, but remember that you need to adapt in time. The second important part, less important than you may think, you need a problem or a code base to work on. It can be an open source project, it can be a toy project, it can be an exercise code base. There's a list of coding katas that you can find. If you want to focus on refactoring, Emily Bash, which will join us later, she has a series of exercises and code bases for refactoring katas. There's a trivia code base that we use for legacy code retreats, and so on. You can find a lot of things like this. These are less important. The most important part is the skill that you're trying to improve. The problem is just there to give you something to try your skill on. And then set 30 minutes of focus time. That's all. 30 minutes. You may adjust the duration later. You may increase it to 45, 1 hour, 2 hours. But if you just want to start, just do 30 minutes of focus time when you work on a problem, practicing a specific skill, and just think about the things that don't go so well, because this gets us to the last and perhaps more important part, the thing that makes a lot of difference between deliberate practice and other types of practice, a type of feedback, a retrospective. What went well? Where did you get stuck? What slowed you down? What are the things that you can measure? If you are not measuring anything, can you add something to measure? Do you need to adapt the duration? Right? So these are a few questions that you may ask during the retrospective. And you may find out that, for example, I don't know a specific shortcut, or I don't know a CSS property and I keep looking for it in the documentation, or various things like that. And then when you go into your next deliberate practice session, try to focus on the things that you are mistaken. Remember what Mavis was doing to me, picking out texts that were testing my number keys, which were not so good. That's where we need to focus on the things that we are making, well, wrong or not as fast as we'd like, let's say. Not necessarily wrong, but perhaps we want to do them faster to forget about them. And the last important step, adapt. You may adjust the duration, you can add or remove some constraints. So for example, for refactoring, one very useful constraint is don't touch the mouse or the touchpad. Just try to go using keyboard only and see what happens. And this is especially valuable when you want to learn how to refactor faster using your IDE and so on. And start measuring some things, perhaps. All right, so it's time to go through an example. And I will try to draw. Okay. Let's say we want to learn refactoring better. What can we do to learn refactoring better? So the first step that I said was we could probably split this into smaller skills. So what skills are involved in refactoring? First, we have two types. There's manual and there's automatic. And by manual, I mean you are changing all the code by hand. By automatic, I mean you are using your IDE that already has some refactoring built in. There's probably a third one when you are using things like Vim or something like that, where you can learn specific combinations of commands that can help you, but for now I'll skip this. Then you have the various refactoring types. All right, we have rename, we have inline, we have extract, method, function, and so on. And we have things like move a method to another class, or move a class inside another class, or any kind of things like that. And there are more of these, and there's a catalog that you can find, but I won't go into all of them. So then what would be an interesting exercise for refactoring? Well, if you are thinking about refactoring, in this case, first thing we need is a code base. We cannot refactor something that doesn't exist. It has to be there. It's useful if we have a code base with full test coverage. And this is where Emily Bash's like tennis code base and the others that she built are very useful because they already have the test coverage. But you can ask somebody to help you do that, or you can pick some code that already has test coverage. And the reason we want test coverage is because we want to know if we are doing refactoring properly, because refactoring means we are not breaking the code. And in this case, one thing we can measure is number of times code broke. How do we know that? Well, we know that because the tests are failing, if we have tests. So if you have this, we already have a metric. Now, how would an exercise look like? Well, if we think about the Mavis style, what we could do is to start from, let's say, manual. And we could do exercises such as rename back. And where do we start? We start with a variable. We then move to a method. We then move to a class. And then maybe namespace. But there's a progression here, right? So let's say we pick a variable, rename it back. Do this, see if you make any mistakes. If your tests are failing, perhaps you need to do something different. Also, after this exercise, you can already think, So am I doing something that is slowing me down? Can I do anything to make this faster? Right. Another thing where you can do the same type of exercise is extract and inline. So you could extract a method and then inline a method. Basically, go back to the initial state and see how fast am I doing this? Is there anything that I can do better, and so on. And then we can start combining these things. So let's say we extract a method, we inline it, extract a method, we rename it, we inline back, and so on. And these may look again like quite boring exercises, but trust me, if you try to do them live, and of course if you don't know all the techniques, if this is a challenge for you, you'll find out that it's quite interesting to do these things, and you get really focused. And how long do you think it will take you to do these 3 exercises? Probably no longer than 30 minutes. And after 30 minutes, you've already learned something about your skills and the things that you may need to change or to improve, and so on. Now, of course, this is, if you look at this and if you know refactoring, you know that refactoring is much more than these steps, right? Refactoring is also about improving designs, which implies that you have an idea about how to improve designs, which implies that you know what is a better design than other. These exercises don't teach you better design, but they teach you the mechanical part of refactoring. So it's only part of it, it's only a small slice of what refactoring means. And if you want to learn more about design, Rebecca Worsbrook will discuss about design heuristics and how you can learn them. Okay. So this would be an exercise. Let's quickly move. In conclusion, as I said in the beginning, time is fixed. You choose what to do with it. I showed you a way with examples of learning and improving your skills, but it's up to you whether you want to do this or not. I won't force you, I won't blame you if you play video games or watch Netflix, but know that you can do this in 30 minutes to 2 hours. I won't recommend more than 2 hours of focused practice like this. And if you're doing 2 hours, take breaks, or you can do something else. That's all up to you. I would like to thank you. This is where you can find me on Twitter as Alex Bolli, on email alex.bolbak@mosaiccourse.com. Thank you for attending this session and this conference, and if you have any questions, I'd be happy to answer them. I don't see any questions yet, but I will wait a few minutes, a few seconds. Okay. Do you have an example for learning the same in different programming paradigms? Yes. So as you may know, I've been a part of the Code Retreat organizers for more than 10 years now, and co-retreat facilitators. And some of my personal favorite sessions at the Code Retreat have been around the various paradigms of programming. So what you can do, for example, is to set constraints. If you want to go into a very functional programming style, you try to think about everything as data in, data out, and transformations between data in and data out. One example I give, and that we've done often to show people a way of structuring in functional programming, is to start from a tic-tac-toe board that is either empty or has some moves on it or is full, and you need to decide whether somebody wins or not. But to do that only by applying transformations on the data, and that becomes a very interesting constraint to apply. Perhaps a simpler example is you can start by again, if you want to learn things like functional programming, the first thing you should know is lambdas and how to write them, and then you think about composing lambdas, and then you think about partial application. So there's a path that you can take, and so you can have exercises for first write lambdas, then compose lambdas, then do partial application. And then there's an exercise where you take a class that is written in an object-oriented style, and you replace it with a set of lambdas. Basically extract every function from the class as a lambda, and pass all the parameters as either partial application or as how is it called, context-bound variables. And that's how you can learn the equivalence between object-oriented design and functional design, and see these differences. So these are just a few examples of things that you can do to move between object-oriented and functional. Now, if you want to learn more object-oriented style programming, then there are some interesting constraints that you can use, like tell, don't ask, or what I think is the initial and the purest form of object-oriented programming, the one where you communicate not by directly calling another object, but only through passing messages, because that's what object-oriented programming was initially about. So basically, you can have a problem, let's say Conway's Game of Life. You create a class in the middle that's kind of the event bus for the whole thing. And then whatever you want to do, you need to call the event bus. You cannot call directly something else. And that's how you learn more about the initial idea of object-oriented programming. And interestingly enough, you get a better idea of how microservices can be structured. So it goes into architecture if you practice enough. So these are just a few ideas from the top of my head. But I think there are a lot of exercises for doing like functional programming style things, which are quite interesting. Okay, so this was my talk on deliberate practice from the 8th edition of I.T.A.K.E. Unconference that took place digitally, remotely. If you have any questions about this topic, don't hesitate to contact us. We are coming back next week with new interesting videos, and until next time, remember to think, design, and work smart.